Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. This is sort of part two of a culture-y sort of chat, but this is more relative to seasons, and I thought I'd make a start quickly while everything's running, because the kit, typical, and as I start it all shuts down. We just had a little bit of sunshine which raised the temperature. When the temperature goes up, the extractor fan kicks in to suck out the hot air at the point where it's hottest, near the roof. And alongside that, down there is the little inlet fan, which is conveniently turned off, so I can't show you it working, but that's where the cooler air is sucked in to replace the hot air. And then the circulating fans mix everything up, the idea being that it never gets too hot near the roof or too cold near the floor. It keeps it stirred up. And as you know from a previous video, this particular humidifier is now wired in to the thermostat that controls those two big fans. Not the circulating fans, they're manual at the moment. Yeah, I just turn them on as and when I need them. And I'm cheating at the moment, so we're filming in the fog. I've just upped the hydrostat because I want to keep the humidity exceptionally high today. They've just turned off as well now. The reason being that I'm out tomorrow, so I want to leave my daily mounts watering till later in the day, but some of them are quite dry. I mean, the bare-rooted Tolumnias got watered this morning anyway. It's now PM, not AM. They've got to be done every day without fail, and if I get hot days, they may well get done twice until they establish new root systems which will better hydrate the plant with just a single watering a day, unless it's exceptionally warm. So, right, this is more about, I suppose as everything's shut down, I could turn the fans off and quieten everything down. So that one I just pull the plug out, because the switch is up on the roof and I'm not that tall, and this one I just shut down, and then it all goes peaceful and quiet till the foggers kick on again. Okay, so first of all, some ground rules. I live on the south coast in the UK, which is a point in the globe away from the equator, and it's a certain distance away from the equator. And if you draw a line round the globe, everybody who lives on that line is in a similar set of circumstances. There's a similar distance below the equator in the southern hemisphere. Okay, you draw a line round there, and everybody's in a similar position. Until we go back to the first thing I said, which was I live on the coast. Therefore, I am virtually at sea level. I think I'm about 30 metres above sea level where I am here. Otherwise, I'd have my feet wet, wouldn't I, if I was at zero? But yeah, as soon as you take elevation into consideration, you know, the latitude you are on the globe can vary dramatically. You can live on the equator on the top of a mountain and be freezing cold, even though you are allegedly in the warmest place on the planet. So height bears a lot of bearing on your seasons and everything else. But most of the orchids we grow come from the tropics, the likes of these. Well, that doesn't exist in the real world because it's a hybrid, but you know what I mean. The tropical orchids, their hybrids, their offsprings and everything like that live in a place where the seasonal changes are minimal. The day lengths near the equator vary between 11 and 13 hours a day, and they don't go outside of that range, and the temperatures are reasonably constant, you know, throughout each day. So that's where they come from, and then we uproot the flipping things and bring them to where we live, which is not necessarily the same thing. Now, the differences that I have to put up with in the UK and have to make allowances for and deal with are, in the summer, now we've just gone past the midsummer point where the longest day was. That longest day is nearly 16.5 hours long. Yeah, that's a lot of daylight. Even on a dull day, the length of time it's light for that day is a very long time. Its equivalent in the winter time is the shortest day of the year. which is pretty damn short. It's around 7.5 hours. And those day lengths are measured from sunrise to sunset. Now obviously there's still a little bit of daylight before the sun comes up, physically, you know, and after it sets. So they are slightly longer than that, really, but the light level would be poor. Okay, so those are the variables. Twice a year, once in the spring and once in the autumn, the day length and the night length is exactly the same. Solstice, I think that's called. Okay, and then all the days in between are a variable of those factors. And in amongst that is not only the length of the day, but the rate of change. And the rate of change is at its most dramatic in the spring and the autumn. So the short day lengths through our winter stay relatively constant, let's say between that 7.5 and 8.5, which is nowhere near enough light to grow tropical orchids. Some get round this by having artificial lighting and they extend their days. I can't do that in here. Just look at the practicalities. Bearing in mind the lights have to be quite close to the plants to have any real effect. You know, I've got a little light up there. If I turn that on, it'll affect about 6 plants if I'm lucky. So for me to have artificial lights, I'd need some above that shelf, some above that shelf, something to do down through there, something above that lot, something above that lot, something above that. I can't have that many lights in here. Too much electrics, too much wiring, too much fuss. So I live with natural light. That's how I work. Right, now I can show you that. That's the cool air coming in down through there. You can see the plants that get hit with it. They're actually moving. They're there for a reason. They like to stay cool and they like moving air. So Odontoglossums gently moving in the breeze, Miltoniopsis, Nelliila, one coelogeny, and that cool air circulates round here at the lower level. So all my other coelogenies are there as well. So that's how it works. Right, so let's start at a good point. At some point the day lengths start getting longer from that 7.5 to 8.5, which is negligible. They gradually creep forward and they get up to somewhere between 9.5 and 10. And at that point my plants start to respond. New growths will start, buds will start to form. There's some movement in those plants which I have to watch for, because at that time the watering will need to increase because they're starting to grow. That's quite an important time of year. Okay, and then gradually the day lengths will get longer and they reach the magic 11 hours sometime in relatively early to mid-spring. And that's the trigger for most of the plants to think, hello, it feels like home. This is what I'm used to. This is what I know. I know these 11 to 13 hour day lengths, so I can start behaving normally again and the growth rate will increase. You'll see it. It actually shows. There are some plants where it's negligible, things like Paphiopedilums, who just go slow whatever the flipping time of year is, in my experience. I know there's actually some quite vigorous growers, but I haven't got any of those. I've all got Mr. Slows sat on the shelf. Okay, so that's the point at which your watering starts to go up and you need to start introducing some food. Yeah? So you start your fertilizing program very gently at first. Don't go mad and go up to full strength on the first time you ever hit 11 hours. You'll probably burn your roots. And most of that fertilizer will go straight through the pot and won't get used. So you just as well pour it down the sink. Don't waste your fertilizer. Make sure it can be used. Okay, so that's the start of the growing season as we head up towards the 11-hour day lengths. And at that point, under normal circumstances, the temperatures are getting better. When the sun decides to show itself at that time of year, it's out for longer. That will build up your temperatures in your houses, through your windows, in your greenhouses. You know, in my grow room, my daytime temperatures start to climb. And that helps with the growth. So we've now got it a little bit warmer at daytime. It can still be flipping cold at night. And at night time in the winter, I've got a heater, again on a thermostat. Yeah? So I have a minimum temperature to try and maintain the intermediate requirements of the majority of the plants I've got. Now, some of them can take it colder, but they're not going to get it, because some of them I'm already pushing my luck, letting it go down to 14 or 15. There's one there. It's called a Phalaenopsis. Where do these come from? Yeah, I know they're hybrids. Well, that one's not. That's a species. In their natural environment, these are hot, steamy jungle jobs. And you'd class 18 to 20 as their bare minimum. And highs of 27, 28. They love it. Especially if you've got the humidity up as well. That's really what they want. But they survive outside of those ranges. So they do okay. They're very tolerant orchids. Others, not so much. You get them outside of their comfy range and they object. They usually object by going downhill and even keeling over and turning their toes up. So, you know, you've got to watch it. So anyway, we come out of the early spring period where things start coming back to life, and we get into the growing season. And as that progresses, we can increase our feed levels. We'll need to increase the frequency of our watering because the plants will be using it up quicker. At this particular point, you usually get a spurt of root growth on some types. Well, if they need repotting, that's not a bad time. But personally, I wait to see that spurt of root growth or anticipate its presence because of my records. Because I'm now keeping those records, so I know at which point most of the plants are going to kick their new roots out. So if they need repotting, I can plan for it. And it's not always in the spring. It's when it's required. So we whiz on through the growing season, the days get longer, temperatures get higher. Quite honestly, that's just a matter of keeping up with your plants, because they're now going to start racing ahead of what you've got used to. Since the previous autumn, right through the winter, into the early spring, you've got into lazy habits, where the watering is just now and again, and I don't need to bother with that much feed. And it's a very complacent time because there isn't much to do, because not much is happening. Well, as soon as you get into that spring and you get into those 11-hour plus days, your plants start racing ahead. You need to keep up with them. You need to keep up with your watering, your frequency, and your feeding and your frequency. And once they get into strong active growth, that's the time they need the most water and the most food, up to their limits. Yeah? So then we get the equivalent at the other end of the season. And this is the time when, quite honestly, probably more damage is done to some of our orchids than at any other time of year. Because we then get into a pattern of watering every so many days, because the plants need it. So it becomes a little bit predictable. So we get into a habit. Well then, you know, the sun's not out as often as we get into autumn, perhaps. The night temperatures are dropping down a bit. Yeah? Day lengths are getting shorter. And the plants respond to that by slowing down. Well, you keep chucking that amount of water and food in there, you're not going to do them a lot of good. So you have to then slow up with your plants. So it's your plants that are driving everything, but they're being driven by the changes around them, their environmental changes. And as I said, don't forget this is UK South Coast. I'm being specific here, and it may apply to many other people, but it won't apply to everybody. If you're growing in Florida, outside in the sunshine, you can probably take no notice of this at all, because that's so vastly different to how I have to grow. This is probably not relevant. Yeah? Okay, so we then come into autumn and things start to slow down. And the thing that starts coming to my mind at that point is my resting type dendrobiums, because they're a special case. Yeah, and if I don't treat them special, the chances are I'll either get no blooms or not very many. So they have to now become a separate set. And as the day lengths shorten, unfortunately this is the downside. This is where there's a major compromise. I know which are my, drier winter rest type dendrobiums. Deciduous forest types come into the fall My day lengths are going to get shorter. Theirs are going to get a bit shorter where they come from, but not to the extent that mine are. But come the fall, why it's called the fall is because all the leaves fall. Yeah? Well, if you live in a deciduous forest and your leaf cover disappears, suddenly it gets an awful lot brighter. Yeah, but does it? This is where I dispute some of what the books say. You know, well, if all the leaves come off, it must be a lot brighter. Yeah? Well, not necessarily. Because it's been raining most of the year and everything's soaking wet, and the temperatures start to drop a bit, especially at night, you get a lot of fog and mist. So things are still damp. They're not dry. Might not rain today, that doesn't mean everything's dry. Because of the temperature changes, everything's going to be covered in dew in the morning to the point of dripping wet, and it's going to be foggy and misty. Well, if you've ever looked up at the sky in the fog, can you see the sun? Well, can you hell? So it's not suddenly bright just because the leaves have come off. It takes time. And under most circumstances, this dry winter rest starts off as a wet, dull winter rest. Yeah? And then gradually, as the seasons progress and the air movement around the planet, a fair bit of that moisture starts to drift away. So as you get towards the end of the winter, it can be quite dry and very bright. Lovely clear days, no mist and fog. You'd still probably get a bit of dew in the morning simply because there is some moisture in the air and the temperature drops at night. That's just nature, you can't stop that. And where you get that condensation, that dew forming, the plants aren't dry. They're going to get some moisture. So they're not bone dry. And that's it. That's my definition of the winter rest. So for me, my winter resting dendrobiums, they'll get their watering slowed down with the shortening of the days and the lower nighttime temperatures. Their feed will be reduced to nothing sometime during October. You know, it's weather dependent. If we get a bright, cheerful autumn where we get good sunshine and good bright light, I won't slow them down as soon. I'll let them grow on for a while. I need to wait for that weather to change. It's important. But when it really gets to end of autumn and you can feel that winter chill coming on and the days are often duller and it starts raining a bit more, all that sort of time, my resting dendrobiums at that point will have had all their feed stopped and their water reduced to a bare necessity. Now for me, if I leave them in the grow room, they won't get a true rest because my humidity's high in here, which is somewhat like they might get. But also I'm keeping the temperatures higher because of all my other plants. So to do the best I can, I take them out of the grow room and they go up in the coolest place I've got in the house that's also the brightest place. And there's a little compromise there. They go up on a spare bedroom window that effectively faces just off south, about southwest. Yeah? But there's no shading whatsoever. That's the most light I can give my plants apart from taking them outside, which would not be a good idea in the winter. So that's where they live. That's where they start their winter rest. Now, some of them will be bare-rooted mounts. Some of them will be in some moss. So they have to be checked every now and again and make sure that canes are not showing any signs of desiccation. Yeah? And give them a drop of water. Now, some people do that with a sprayer so that they don't get them too wet. I go down that road. But at the end of the day, I'm not stopping watering at Halloween and starting again on Valentine's Day because I would have dead dendrobiums. The atmosphere in that bedroom is dry. It's a house. It's not a grow room, so they have to have some water. But anyway, that's the resting dendrobiums. They're a special case. But the rest of the plants are still in here. What are they doing in here? Well, the answer is not a lot. Most of them will have slowed right down. The Vandas will have virtually stopped growing. They still get their hydration on their roots, but they're not going to use most of that water. So they don't need to spend half an hour in the bucket, they just need dunking in and taking straight out. But they still need that hydration at the roots. That's the way I will take mine through the winter. They will still get that hydration. But other plants, yeah? Well, I'm talking about a 4-season environment, the spring, summer, autumn, winter stuff, which most of them aren't used to a greater extent. But that's what I've got to do. But that season is annual. 4 seasons take a year to pass. Not all orchids have an annual cycle. Some of the Oncidium types will mature a growth in 8 months, sometimes a bit less, sometimes a bit more, at which point that growth is large enough to bloom. So it'll do that. Yeah? Now think about trying to apply a 4-season logic to a plant that's got an 8-month cycle on it. You need to know your plant. You know, if a plant is actively growing new growths despite the short day lengths, it's managing to fight through that and carry on growing, it's going to need some water. And it probably needs a little bit of food as well. Not as much as you would in the middle of the summer. It's going to need something to get those new growths going and mature them. The consequences of not doing that is you will get smaller growths in the winter, which may not bloom. But I believe you can keep those growing and actually make them mature at roughly the same size as one that would happen in the summer. Now I've got no practical examples of this that I can show you because they're all at different times of the year. But I'm pretty confident that from my records I've had Oncidium types that have got that short growth cycle that have matured growths and bloomed quite happily in December or January. They just do. But they won't if you restrict the growth of those new growths because it's your winter and they're getting treated like all the others that have an annual cycle. There's quite a few Cattleya types that come into that category too, where they bloom when the growth gets mature, however long that takes. Now it'll take longer in the winter, but that doesn't mean to say it can't mature its bulbs. I mean, quite a few Cattleyas actually mature their bulbs through the growing season and bloom in the autumn and early winter. And what a lovely show that gives us on those dull days. But you need to get to know your plant. And you can't get to know it when you first bought it. All you can do is read or listen to other people. But eventually, you'll have had your plant, you'll see it grow, you'll see how long it takes, see when it blooms, at what point. I mean, there's some that produce their flower spikes well before the growth's matured. That's a mature bulb. That's not. That's still only halfway there, and yet it's got its blooms. Yeah? Well, if that growth reached that stage in December, that's what would happen. It's not an annual seasonal plant like some others are. So get to know your plants. Your Dendrobium nobilis, your hybrids, because I doubt if there's many have actually got the species. That's a bit fiddly, that one. If you don't treat that right, you won't get any blooms. But the hybrids are more tolerant. They tend to have an annual cycle. You know, they push up their new growths in the spring, normally just around the same time as you get your loads of pretty blooms, late winter, early spring. That's when they do their thing. And then those new growths need pushing on all through the growing season with the longer days and the higher temperatures until they reach their maturity in the autumn, where they slow down and rest for a bit. Yeah? And then the cycle starts again, late winter, early spring. That's how they go. And that's how a lot of dendrobiums are. Yeah. So, I mean, this is an oddity, this Hercoglossum. Well, blow me, there's a flower spike. I thought that had finished for the year. It's going to have another little flurry. A floriette, because that is tiny. That'll just be about 3 blooms, I expect. But a little splash of colour. But this one hasn't got an annual cycle. This is weird, this one, because the new growths that are pushing on now, yeah, they will grow on through this growing season, and they'll be about half size. And then come the autumn and the winter, do they stop growing? No, they don't. They carry on. through what most dendrobiums would call a rest period. They carry on growing. So when they get to spring next year, they're approaching full size. But they still probably haven't finished growing and will carry on for a bit longer. Yeah? And then they'll go into the autumn having stopped growing in their second year, and they'll bloom in the following spring. So that's not an annual cycle, that's a two-annual cycle. To actually get a cane from a new growth to blooming size takes 2 years, not 1. So there are differences. Okay, so that's just I'm getting fogged. And I've got the fans off, so I'm going to have to put the fan back on. It's sticking in my throat. That's better. Get a bit of breeze round. Yeah, so that's a sort of chat about the seasons. And remember that where you live affects those seasons to the extent where they might not even exist. Yeah, so this would be a total waste of time. But, you know, there's quite a few people, you know, you follow that line round, even down into Europe, you know, people in France, people in Spain, people in Germany, they've got 4 seasons. You know, they'll be of different lengths and, you know, different temperatures, but they've still got those 4 seasons. And it's only when you start getting down into the likes of Africa and places like that that the seasons start to disappear. Closer to the equator you get, the less the seasonal effect. And there comes a point where you just switch from having 4 distinct seasons to really not having any apart from a wet period and a drier period. And that's the way it goes. So adjust your growing according to your seasons. If a plant's not growing much at all, it won't use much water. You keep watering it and keeping those roots soggy, at that point your roots will rot. So watch your plants, watch your seasons, bear in mind your temperatures and your day lengths, and adjust your routines to suit how your plants are. That way you can keep them as happy as you possibly can, given that they don't like those silly short days, they don't like the lower temperatures, but this is where I live. You know, like it or lump it. And most of them do okay in the winter. They just slow down and in some cases virtually stop. But as long as I stop what I would normally do, like chucking water on them like they're on fire, as long as I adjust accordingly, they'll make it through that winter period when nothing much is going on and delight me with pretty things like this. Now I know it's not spring, but you know what I mean. Come the spring, it all bursts into life. We look forward to it. We look forward to a mass of nobly blooms and, you know, some of the other things that come out in the spring. I mean, like Vandas, for me, they don't bloom until the summertime. There's no good waiting for blooms on those in the spring because it ain't going to happen. Day lengths aren't long enough. They're not getting enough light. So they need those longer days. Then they chuck out their spikes and they do wonderful things. So all plants are different. Talking of differences, I got to try and work out what the hell to do with my Disa, because these are strange and these are very different to most orchids. They're like bog plants, yeah, they like to stay wet, so in the summertime they stand in water. But come the autumn, that's the traditional time to think about repotting them, because they've got like a corm affair underground. And, you know, that will push up the leaves and eventually the flower spike when it's big enough and strong enough. But then it starts to grow little plantlets round the edge. And those are the ones that you need to grow on to get some more blooms. But often that older part dies and rots. So if it stays in the pot, it'll take out the young growths with it and start a rotting process that can take down what is effectively next year's plants. So somehow or other I've got to work out what to do in the autumn. I've got a few experts to chat to at the Orchid Society, one of which who grows spectacular Disas and has been doing for donkey's years. So I'll have a chat. What do you do? When do you repot? What do you put them in? Do you take all the old corms off? Do you leave some on? Is there a way of telling the difference? I'll have to go into all that because I've got one and I don't want to lose it. And if I have my way, I'll have a few more. Anyway, seasons. You adjust to the seasons, because your plants are. Yeah, and they might be doing it without you really knowing, but follow your plants. If they slow up, they don't drink and they don't feed anywhere near as much as when they're in full-blown growth. So adjust to your seasons. And you should come out the other end of the grotty UK winter with some happy plants and a mass of buds, on a fair few of them anyway, depending on the types you've got, obviously. I mean, it's traditional for Phalaenopsis to bloom in the winter. And what the hell triggers that then? Because it's certainly not the longer days, is it? Because they suddenly get shorter days. Perhaps it's the drop in temperature? Open-ended question. If your light levels are reducing dramatically in your home, perhaps your Phalaenopsis need to go a bit closer to the windows. You know. Because I was told reliably when I said, why won't my Phalaenopsis bloom? That was when I had all my daughters down here as well. And most people said, well, they need a bit of a drop in temperature, especially at night. And they need more light. You know, it's always the answer, isn't it? My plant won't bloom. Well, it needs more light. It's not always the answer, but quite honestly, it often is. So anyway, you know, adjust your habits and your routines to the seasons. Don't get into a calendar habit where because it's Saturday, all my plants are going to get watered. The ones that need watering are the ones that need watering, and the ones that are still wet don't. So make sure you adjust accordingly. Okay, so happy growing, that was sort of part 2, and I changed my mind halfway through part 1. So the bit that I was going to do about all the oncidiums and everything will now be a separate entity, which I'm part way through. I've got some bits and pieces that I need to add to, but I'm getting there. And as I said, I'm out this evening, which I probably can't film, at the Orchid Society, and I've said this evening when this might not even get posted till tomorrow. We're going to do the time zones again. I'm not sure whether I will put up 2 quite long videos in one day or just literally save this one and do it tomorrow morning before I go out, because otherwise there'll be nothing tomorrow. I'm out all day, and then Sunday will be a massive watering session because I was out all day Saturday. So this one's probably going to go up Saturday morning, but whenever. Hope you enjoyed it. Have a think about, you know, what I'm saying and why and everything, and does it affect you, and if it does, take some of the things on board, and if it doesn't, I bet you wish you hadn't stayed till the end. See you next time. Bye for now.